Good morning and welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. We're getting straight into things today. Now, I do have a radio on in the background, not playing constant, but is a little bit of local amateur radio traffic that I'll be monitoring for a bit here, mainly because if we pay attention to what's going on with the weather, we'll see that there is a lot of severe weather that's expected today. So we'll be discussing that later on in the in today's broadcast, but if anything comes through, I don't expect anything this morning, but if anything does come through, I may have to end the stream early and bail out. So let's go ahead and get started on the actual news that's going on that we want to touch on. We'll start with the headliner today, and that is the withdrawal from the front lines of the Abrams tanks. Now, the Americans sent about 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine last January, and at the time, they were probably a very good decision and a good investment in their time. In fact, there are some people that are stating that that was very much the case. However, time has moved on, and drones have managed to take over the battlefield. In fact, the use of drones has changed the situation on the battlefield, making it more difficult for Ukraine to defend these tanks that are quickly detected by these hunter-killer drones. The Abrams tank is a large tank. It's certainly not one that's going to hide on the battlefield at all. And this is, at this point in time, its virtues have now become its vices in this regard. The Ukrainians are not necessarily excited to pull them off the front lines, but they have recently lost 5 of them in a row to Russian attacks with drones. Again, it's the drones that are making the big difference on the battlefield these days, not so much artillery or other classic systems that have been the issue with it. So some people are saying this is the end of the reign of the tank on the battlefield. I am not quite so convinced at this point in time. I think it is much more likely that tanks will now add a new device or two to their arsenal, something that is good at intercepting drones, such as the Trophy Active Protection System, or other similar things that are designed to counter and stop drone attacks. On top of that, we've been seeing the Russians get very creative with sheet metal and welding to create sheds over the tops of their tanks to stop drone attacks. There will be both a high-tech and a low-tech solution to this, but there's a lot that will be coming eventually. Hi, Lucille. Glad to have you here. And Vincent, glad you managed to stop in for a bit. Tell us what you're filming when you get a little chance. Be interesting to hear what you're doing. But thank you for stopping in, and we'll see you later. As continuing on with the information on the Abrams tanks, at this point, they're pulling them back off the front lines, not to remove them from service entirely, but to rethink their strategy of using these American, effectively heavy tanks on the battlefield. But the more these drones have been taking out these expensive pieces of hardware, the harder it is to justify using them on the battlefield in many ways. These, again, this is just, as far as I can tell, a temporary thing. The press service of the 47th Mechanized Brigade is saying, dude, stop dissing the Abrams tanks. As Dimitri from War Translated provided for us here, I think that's just a little bit off the side. Let me see. Can I get this? There we go. That's better. The 47th Mechanized Brigade is saying, stop dissing the Abrams tanks. They're pretty good. As I say, these tanks do a great job on the battlefield, and we're definitely not going to hide from the enemy what usually makes them hide themselves, and even more so to leave our infantry without such powerful fire support. Yet what, where, and for what purpose is being transferred by the armed forces of Ukraine is not something we will comment on publicly. We ask you to trust only verified information, and before publishing materials, contact the press service, blah, 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 blah. So overall, the situation is that they're likely being pulled from the immediate front lines until they can rethink how they're going to use them, because the Abrams tanks does scare the Russians. It's quite capable of removing any Russian heavy armor, light armor, or anything else like that from the battlefield. The other consideration that maybe should be thought about is that right now in order to use like a high explosive equivalent, they have a specialty round for that purpose. But they might want to look at making a pure high explosive for 120 millimeter smoothbore cannons, at least for a low cost, high effectiveness round to use against infantry and other lightly armored vehicles that could be a lot cheaper to field than, say, a high dollar do everything round that they've got nowadays. I don't know, just a thought process there. But the Abrams will be back. And in fact, I don't think it's being withdrawn entirely from the battlefield, just pulled off of front lines until they can get this rethought for just a few minutes. Now, there was a story that a couple of hospitals in Kiev were actually evacuated after a Belarusian security chief made they call it a surprise threat in a public address. Let me see if I can get the details here, because it was a kind of a weird thing here. The authorities in Kyiv have actually announced the evacuation urgently of 2 hospitals, including one of them being a children's hospital, because a Belarusian security chief, Ivan Tertel, said that at the All Belarusian People's Assembly, he says that, quote, terrorists hiding in Kiev hospitals. And then he named the addresses of 2 hospitals on Bohatirska Street. Now, Belarus is not directly participating in the war, but they did allow Russian troops. Oh, welcome back, Vincent. Sorry to hear about your plans changing, but always glad to have you back. Anyway, so he's referenced these terrorists hiding in Kiev hospitals and then gave these addresses on Bohatirska Street. Belarus not technically participating in the war, but they've allowed Russian troops to march through Belarus to go and attack Ukraine. But these 2 hospitals are not military hospitals, and there are no military personnel in these hospitals. Is this just a pure psyop? Is this an attempt to just cause panic in Kyiv? I don't know. The city administration does state that they are not seeing any evidence that there's a planned strike on these so far, but they're doing this to protect children, their parents, adult patients, and staff from a possible attack. So that was a surprise, we'll just put it that way. Now, one of the other big bits of news that's been popping around is this report that a Russian, this says Ka-32, but it was actually a Ka-32 multi-role helicopter that was destroyed at Ostafyevo Airport in Moscow. Now, this helicopter, there's actually video of it being destroyed and burned. The Ukrainian Ministry of Intelligence Directorate has stated that this was used for the evacuation of soldiers from the battlefield and for logistics. So they're reporting that it was used in a combat or military facility there. Here's some of the video from that. Oop, hold on, got to refresh here. And I've got it muted on my side because it does have music on it. You can see a fire started inside. And it's later reported that most of the interior of this helicopter was destroyed. So clearly this is a direct sabotage operation directed at this specific helicopter or any other helicopter involved here. Just that actually showed the person lighting the fire there if you took a closer look at that. Anyway, so this helicopter burned at the airfield. Now, the Russians say that it was only used for firefighting and it was never used for military uses. Take your pick on who you want to believe. They claim that this is that helicopter painted in firefighting colors. Again, I have no proof one way or another on that. The video that's provided does not show either way. Overall, it is an asset that the Russians had. Uh, the Russians have been targeting Ukrainian first responder equipment all over the place, so I'm not necessarily going to make a comment either way. But these Ka-32s could easily have been used for the purpose. The only reason I think it might not have been a firefighting one is because the lighting doesn't really reflect right for a red-colored helicopter. Just say it. Don't know for sure. Can't say it one way or another. And I can't speak to it in more detail than that because there is no more information available than literally what I've just told you. So, but the real story here, that is a sabotage group that made it all the way to effectively Moscow. So, how secure are the Russians if they really think about it? Let's go ahead and move on to the news out of Ukraine here. Vincent's good to see you, Ozzy. Always glad to have you here. Vincent says the Ka-32s and Ka-29s were built for military use, so he's going with the Ukrainians on this one. I'm inclined to go that way as well. Sorry, that was for future items right there. News out of Ukraine. Ukraine has now retrieved the bodies of 140 fallen soldiers who've been repatriated from Russia, according to the coordination headquarters for the treatment of prisoners of war. It's always tough, but at least there will be some families that are going to get a little bit of peace, knowing exactly what happened to their loved one. Another massive Russian attack. Equipment at 4 DTEC thermal power plants were damaged. Power engineers were trying to work on that and get that solved. There are casualties. They also attacked facilities in Dnipropetrovsk, Ivano-Frankivsk, and Lviv regions. In total, they used 34 air, land, and sea-launched missiles, with 21 of them being destroyed by the Ukrainian forces. You can see some of the work there to overcome the fire there. The routes of the Russian missiles last night, almost all of them moved through the Kiev region. And this, I have to admit, is actually more concerning than most anything else. Let's get this a little bit larger here. If they went through the Kiev region and they were not intercepted, it means that there's a real shortage of air interceptors, and they had to let some through. Concerning. Interesting change. It also means that they may have stripped some of their air defenses to go to more to vital locations elsewhere and have kept some of the shorter range defenses. I can't speak to it one way or another specifically, but either way, they had to let some of them through. This next one I'm going to put into the potentially misinformation or disinformation category, but it may be out there and I want you to know about it. Tendar reports Ukrainian forces have started using Yak-52 propeller planes to hunt down Russian drones and caught their first prey. This is a Russian drone, they state, emergency parachuting to the ground. This also happened somewhere around Odessa. Now, there are some reasons to kind of put the brakes on this interpretation. You can kind of see the video of the drone coming down, the plane circling around it. This does not look like a combat use of this airplane. Number one, I've seen no evidence of it ever being armed. That does not mean it can't be. Just that I've never seen, none of the models that are mentioned here really get into the armed part of it. I take it back. There is a Yak-52B that was armed in light ground attack role with UB-257 rocket pods. So there is some possibility for arming it. But again, it's not saying I'm not saying it's impossible, just saying by and large, this aircraft is used as a trainer, not as a combat aircraft. So I am withholding judgment. Russian sides have said that it is actually a Ukrainian drone that's falling, and certainly possible. And the Russian Telegram channels are saying that it was actually a Ukrainian drone. So take your pick. Again, this could easily fall again into misinformation or disinformation. I have a hard time believing it. But I've seen it in enough places now, including a typically reliable source, that I have to point it out so you can be prepared to see it in the near future. I would like more context. The more likely, and this is opinion at this point, the more likely explanation is that the plane was being used to monitor a drone in test that was doing testing. The parachute was meant to recover the drone so that they could potentially examine whatever was going on with it, whatever their test was, and this plane was flying the area to keep an eye on the drone. That is the more likely explanation, but we have no official word from the Ukrainians yet. Moving on to the news out of Russia itself. Ukraine's military intelligence launched a cyber attack against the United Russia Party. This is after the United Russia Party claimed earlier in the day that its electronic services were under large-scale distributed denial of service attacks. Interesting to see. I don't see any evidence that they got anything in particular out of it, except for maybe to take them down. Not the best investment of time, but then again, if you've got hackers that are sitting around doing nothing, they might as well disrupt things on Russia's side. Russians finally reported that 22,000 people were evacuated from Tyumen and Orenburg regions due to the floods. This is after 11,000 houses and 17,000 plots were flooded in the region. Overall, it makes me wonder exactly how many citizens were not evacuated, if you know what I'm saying. Russia's Justice Ministry has decided to seek a ban on the anti-Russian separatist movement as an extremist organization, according to the ministry on April 26th. The problem with that, according to Astra, is such an organization does not exist. So they are outlawing a movement that does not exist. This gives you an idea of how the efficiency of Russian bureaucracy. Side story from the flooding in the regions, like I believe this is Orenburg here. This is a horse that had to live on the second floor of the house until the floodwaters started to recede some, and they were able to eventually take it out with some heavy lift equipment. But could you imagine that poor horse and living with it in your upstairs room? He's still standing in looks like about 2 feet of water. Maybe even 3 feet of water, but it looks like about 2 feet of water. And clearly they're taking care of the horse. Just what a situation to be in. I found this graphic extremely interesting. This is the Russian field fortifications that have been created basically since the start of the, there were some pre-2022 fortifications all down here in the occupied areas. But look at all this stuff that's been added along the normal border between Ukraine and Russia, all the way along here and down into Ukraine itself. This is all new construction to try and stop Ukraine's advance. And clearly it's working. But still, the fact that they are now fortifying their actual normal border should tell you something about what they really expected to happen between Ukraine and Russia. They expected to quickly win, easily topple the President Zelensky from power, and did not expect to have to build these. So this is all late to the game and new construction. Interesting. And this post tells us that Russia is finally starting to launch caliber missiles again, this time from submarines in the Black Sea. They've pretty much held off on launching their caliber missiles until just the last few days, and this is how they're doing it. They're taking them in with submarines in hopes that Ukraine won't be able to use their drones on the submarines. Then there was the big attack overnight in the Krasnodar territory. Now, this might have been, I believe this is from night before last, and we're starting to get some of the videos and information of the consequences of it, showing the various explosions and things, including, I've got to mute this here. We can see that the attacks successfully hit something because they are burning, not just single explosions. The report is that the Slovyansk Eco Refinery, the bitumen plant, the Ilya Refinery, and a number of other objects were hit, including the military airfield in Kushchevisk. And now let me see if I've got it here. I think I've got it. The attack happened about 4 in the morning. An AT-1 installation was damaged. A fire started and extinguished. They claim 66 Ukrainian drones were shot down over the region. Now no, not that one yet. This one here. This video purports to show the attack on the military airfield in Kushevskaya, Krasnodar territory. And trust me, you don't want to be hearing what I'm hearing in my ears right now. It is ear-piercing. And people have done some analysis on what they're seeing. These are UPMK, they're guided bomb kits right here. The video has not been authenticated. However, it has been, whoops, that was exactly what I was looking for there. However, it has been geolocated to the Kushevskaya Air Base. This is damage to various equipment and glide bomb kits, and they locate the exact position right here. So this was a clear military target. They don't report any planes being hit, but the destruction of the bombs or the kits themselves would be a big positive for Ukraine. The constant hammering of Ukraine with these guided bombs has been a persistent issue, one that really isn't solvable unless they can get full-on air defenses up close to the front lines that can intercept and kill these airplanes before they can drop their bombs while still over Russian territory. That does mean those air defenses are going to have to be able to reach out and touch somebody over the Russian border. Just saying. Reported the other day that Timur Ivanov had been arrested for corruption, for taking a bribe. Igor Sushko went through this with a lot finer tooth comb, and I'm going to try and summarize while also going through it because this is wild. Now, this ties right back to Prigozhin and his coup and all the things going on. And the thing is that also resulted in this investigation. Let's just go through this. Wild revelations from Vladimir Osechkin's sources on Timur Ivanov's role in Yevgeny Prigozhin's rebellion and demise. Arrest of Ivanov as Putin's retribution. Shoigu's fall is likely coming. Now, a lot of people have said that for a long time, and Shoigu has held on through a whole lot of stuff. Let's see what Igor says. We all know about Prigozhin's attempted coup. Putin had Prigozhin killed, but started an investigation as to what caused Prigozhin to go absolutely nuts. The claim that he wasn't getting artillery and equipment from the Ministry of Defense seemed wrong because he was still effectively operating and still had lots of equipment. But they investigated further, and the Ministry of Defense was choking off support from Prigozhin, and Putin didn't listen. So now, right after Prigozhin was killed, the Ministry of Defense sent assets to Africa to start stealing Prigozhin's assets, including the gold mines and the oil and gas fields. This was done by Ivanov with Shoigu's blessing. As a result, it turned out, or at least the investigators realized that this was the Deputy Defense Minister's actual plan to destroy Prigozhin and steal all his assets worth billions of dollars. Effectively, the oligarchs decided they were going to fight over the pieces. So they looked this over, and this deliberate provocation of Prigozhin, and now Putin blames Ivanov for provoking Prigozhin to betray Putin with his rebellion and march on Moscow. This shell famine that they were reporting was traced directly to Ivanov. So that's the stage being set. Then part 2, as Shishko says, gets even crazier. So what was Ivanov up to? Now, we know that Ivanov was in charge of military, basically construction of military residential buildings and other things like that, financing construction projects. And I'm going to try and summarize this rather than go through the posts individually. So the Ministry of Defense would contract for a building, and they would pick out a mark, a particularly clueless contractor, and say, we want you to build this $5 million building, and we're going to forward you 20%. And this new contractor would be like, oh, great, I'm going to totally overperform on this. I'm going to totally get this done faster than ever, get everything done perfectly so I can get more contracts with the Ministry of Defense. So the Ministry of Defense hands over 20% so we can get started on construction. The company builds the building up to around 80 or 90% completion. Now, this is where things get interesting. Apparently, the way Russian finances work, at least for this type of thing, is that if you end up with an unfinished asset, the amount of percentage of completion will determine, they'll put a bonus on that amount to try and get it finished, because you've had to change contractors partway through, and the cost will inevitably rise for that purpose. So on the books, Ivanov has an asset that is 20% complete, but in reality, it is 90% complete. The Ministry of Defense then says to the contractor, sorry, not going to do it. You're either going to finish it with this 20% or you're not going to get any, or we're going to basically can you. The contractor goes, wait a second, that's not, and then they put him in, charge him with false charges, put him in prison, whatever they've got to do. And then one of their buddies picks up the remainder of the contract. Now, the building's 90% completed, but according to the Ministry of Defense, it's 20% completed. The new guy, the buddy, finishes the 10%, says, okay, you now need to pay me for the 80% plus the bonus for having to switch contractors. Big money, kickbacks to Ivanov and Shoigu, because Shoigu is involved as well. He's actually kind of running the operation behind the scenes, with Ivanov being his bag man. So that's how the embezzlement scheme worked. Now Putin knows about the embezzlement scheme. He also knows that the scheme is being run by Ivanov, and Ivanov was trying to get more out of Prigozhin by basically getting Prigozhin out of the picture and working that aspect there. So that's the plan. That's the thing. Now here comes the really weird part. So this investigation was coming to a head in about the 2021 time period. Timur Ivanov was interrogated as part of this investigation, and that summer, because several of the contractors who got scammed, who were thrown into jail by Ivanov, became cooperating victims or witnesses for these investigators against Ivanov. So now that Shoigu and Ivanov are being fingered by the contractors, they needed to do something to stop the investigation. Now, again, now we're getting into, I wouldn't say speculation, but things that may have tenuous proof at this point in time. So now Shoigu's got to distract Putin from what's going on here. So he started having his general staff fabricate these reports that NATO ground forces were going to go into Ukraine to kick the Russians out of Donbass. And he generated a ton of these reports until Putin believed that there were going to be a NATO-instigated crisis and a war overall, and that he had to stop it somehow or another. This caused him to focus on this potential invasion of NATO. And so he started the full-scale invasion in February 2022, which buried the corruption investigation. So Shoigu now has a reason to keep this going. He wants the war. He has a reason to keep pushing the war. And this is to make sure that there's no way that Putin can take the time to find out what happened. In addition, with a war going on, the Ministry of Defense budget skyrockets. So from his perspective, he's getting all the opportunities to get more money, and he's buried a potentially damaging corruption investigation. So you can take it for the rest of the way. And the thing is that now Vladimir Putin knows about this corruption. Now he knows about Ivanov, because he had to have his own investigators look into what happened with Prigozhin. He knows about Ivanov. He knows Shoigu's involved. They've chucked Ivanov to the wolves right now. what's going to happen to Shoigu? But the question is, can Putin afford to purge the entire top echelon of his defense ministry in the middle of this war? They're in deep. There is nobody who can afford to not win this war. Actually, I'm going to take that back. There's nobody who can afford for this war to stop. Vladimir Putin, if he is indicating that the war is lost, that he's ending the war, he's likely going to be taken down by oligarchs who wanted the money to keep rolling. And his entire economy is now war-based. If he does that, his economy is going to collapse. He'll go into recession, and that's going to basically take down Putin. So Putin can't afford for the war to end. Shoigu knows that if the war ends, Vladimir Putin's going to be looking for his head in particular. So he can't afford for the war to end. This is the situation that Russia has put itself into. None of the people in charge can afford to allow the war to end. Now, I'm going to state straight up that this information is based on various sources. There is a lot of speculation involved here. This is both Igor Sushko's opinion, and I can absolutely see where he's coming from. This is probably the closest thing I could see to justify this war, or at least explain this war, that I have seen ever. That Russian internal politics resulted in this war having to happen. Not because of anything Ukraine did, not because of anything the West did, but because without this war, there would have been blood drawn and a lot of heads rolling in the Ministry of Defense. And now nobody can afford to stop it. So let's move on from there to the international front. Yeah, that was a lot of stuff I just chucked at you, and it is literally shocking. The link to Igor Sushko's line there, his Twitter post there, is in the comments. So if you want to review that and go through it in more detail, absolutely. A tale of corruption, lies, murder. I tell you, if it wasn't for the fact that I saw a lot of those things happening myself, as far as the news overall continuing over time, I'd have said that if you'd written it for a Hollywood blockbuster, that they would have turned it down for being too unrealistic. Okay, so the international front. Belgium Defense Ministry has said they're going to supply F-16 fighter jets this year, which is earlier than they originally planned. It seems like they're going to really step up the pace to try and get their fighters replaced. And they're also going to give them these Jericho 2 and 3 missiles to go along with it. A new $6 billion package for Ukraine is bringing some new capabilities along. Now, originally, they reported a $1 billion initial package. This $6 billion package, I've seen some kind of rumblings that it was actually left over from the previous and that there's more things going on. But overall, this is basically a package of normal things to expect in aid. This was apparently announced during the recent Ramstein format meeting. This will involve Patriot air defense systems and NASAMS, equipment to integrate Western air defense launchers, missiles, and radars with Ukraine's air defense systems, counter drone and equipment and systems, munitions for laser-guided rocket systems, counter-artillery radars, HIMARS, 155 and 152 millimeter rounds, aerial munitions, precision it mentions specifically, Switchblade and Puma drones. And this is almost an identical list for what was announced in the $1 billion package the other day. Now, the UK also briefed on their largest ever military donation package, talking about the overall support they're giving: 13 million rounds of small arms ammunition, 1,000 more vehicles, including Challenger 2s, which, by the way, from everything I've seen, the Challenger 2 has been amazing over in Ukraine, but they're not using it in headlong charges like they were trying to use with the Abrams for. They've been using them as fire support vehicles. Interesting to see. Another interesting thing I bumped into along those same lines is that the vehicles that are most valuable are self-propelled artillery. The fixed emplacement or like towed artillery, far less valuable because it takes time to stop, set up, fire, and that gives time for counter battery fire. Whereas the self-propelled artillery, you stop, fire, and then you move. So this is interesting to see, and really it sounds like they're far more valuable than even tanks, these self-propelled artillery. And in an era when armor really doesn't help you anymore, that makes sense. Most self-propelled artillery is heavily enough armored to stop small arms fire, nothing more. Estonia and Denmark have transferred 2 naval patrol boats to Ukraine. Now, I'm interested to find out how they're going to get them into Ukraine, but interesting. Now, the media reports the U.S. is hoping that their ATACMS will push Germany to send Taurus missiles. So far, Germany has continued to say, nope. We will see. Vladimir Putin has confirmed he will be leaving the country and heading over to China for a visit in May. This is just more indications of the increasing ties between the two countries. Interestingly enough, I did see a graphic that somebody put out the other day talking about the eastern parts of Russia that are actually belong to China, and they might want those. Just saying, there might be some more motivations there to bring Russia to heel. The Pentagon has stated that these new weapons that have arrived in Ukraine, including these long-range ATACMS, can absolutely be used to hit anything they want in Crimea. So they have not allowed them to be used against purely, Russian territory, but anywhere in Crimea is fair game, and that includes most of the Kerch Bridge. Now, the ATACMS is not the right piece of hardware to attack the Kerch Bridge. They'll probably need something with a bit more boom in order to do it, something like Taurus, which is specifically designed for attacking that type of infrastructure object. But it might be able to do enough damage to close the bridge for a while. It might even be able to do enough to cause them to have to do a lot of repairs on it. That said, the Russians have built a rail line from their side along the southern part of Ukraine to get to Crimea instead. That's vulnerable for other reasons, but still, at least they can use these ATACMS against any targets they want in Crimea. They reported that the delivery of arms and ammunition from the new aid package have already begun to be sent. They're almost already there. They expect it there in short order. And I mentioned this the last couple of videos. Slovakia has said, nope, we are not supporting Ukraine. We're not sending any weapons or equipment. And so the citizens of Slovakia have been fundraising themselves to do so. Initially, they reported 1 million euros, then 1.5 million euros, then 2 million euros, then 3 million euros. They're now up to almost 4 million euros over the 12 days of this fundraising. The citizens themselves have stepped up to the plate, even when their government has stepped back. Iran and Russia are working on a new military agreement. As Anton Herashchenko states, the axis of evil is becoming more and more defined. Relations between Moscow and Tehran have reached a new level against the background of security threats to the two states, Shoigu said at a meeting with his Iranian counterpart, Ashtiani, on the sidelines of the Council of Defense Ministers of the member states of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization countries in Astana. Recently, long-standing friendly relations with Iran have acquired a particularly trusting character and are successfully developing. The intensity of contacts has multiplied, both at the highest level and at the level of the leadership of the military departments. We reaffirm our readiness to further develop and expand mutually beneficial military and military technical cooperation. So, again, Iran and Russia are tying closer together. And again, I remind everyone that it's clear that what's going on in Israel and what's going on in Ukraine, as much as I have treated them as two separate things in the past, the two are intertwined. Russia supports Iran, Iran attacks Israel. Iran supports Russia, Russia attacks Ukraine. The two conflicts are now inextricably intertwined. And the two are both intended to work with each other to create chaos in the West. Spain did confirm they're going to send Patriot missiles to Ukraine, though they did not specify exactly how many. They have ruled out sending the launchers themselves, but more missiles will help. Germany is going to transfer another Patriot system to Ukraine. I'm not clear if this is a new one beyond the one they just recently reported they were going to send to Ukraine, or if this is the same one, but it could be another one. And that's kind of the international front there. Let's go ahead and move on to the actual news from the front lines. Now, one of the biggest pieces of news is one of the primary sources I've been using is Null Reports, and he is taking a couple of weeks off. So while he will be posting things, he's not doing his main update threads, the sit rep threads, which means I'm going to have to dig into some of the other stuff like I used to do a little bit more again, because he was really good at it. So we'll get into some of those things and talk it through. The Defense Intelligence Update from the UK talks about the advance west of Avdiivka. It's accelerated within the last week, with Russian ground forces having created a narrow salient further into Ukrainian territory to enter the town of Otratina, located approximately 15 kilometers north of central Avdiivka. Now, latest reports are that they've effectively taken the town of Otratina. We'll see. We're watching this area particularly closely. Since the Russian ground forces took control of Avdiivka in mid-February 2024, the area has remained one of the primary areas of Russian operations. Despite sustaining continued high losses, it is highly likely that Russian ground forces are able to continuously target Ukrainian positions in the area and have taken control of several small settlements. Pretty much a good summary of what's going on in that area. I pulled out the Institute for the Study of War's assessment from yesterday. They talk about a lot of this stuff here. Russian forces are stabilizing their small salient northwest of Avdiivka and may make further tactical gains that could cause Ukrainian forces to withdraw from other tactical positions along the front line west of Avdiivka to a more defensible line. That is not good news overall, but at least it might save some Ukrainian lives by pulling back to better positions at this point. That said, they're losing some really good positions as it is if they do so. Russian forces, they assess, will likely continue to make tactical gains northwest of Avdiivka, but these gains are unlikely to develop into an operationally significant penetration, let alone cause the collapse of the Ukrainian defense west of Avdiivka. It does appear that these are intended to exploit opportunities for tactical gains. They were initially talking about the operation to seize Chasiv Yar as the most immediate thing that they were focused on, but that section seems to be still kind of languishing just a little bit of progress. But these are the most immediate prospects, they say, for operationally significant advances. U.S. officials are worried that their latest package of U.S. military aid may not be enough for Ukraine to regain all of its territory. That's only part of what Ukraine needs. However, Ukraine itself is working to build their own. They're really working on their manpower challenges and their expansion of their defense industrial base. Now let's go ahead and continue on to the deep state map. They talk about Otrantine and Semenivka. Let's go ahead and get zoomed into those areas. Semenivka itself is a small village south of Berdichi. Now, Berdichi was one of the main defensive lines, and you can see here that it looks like the Russians are either right on it or just past these water features, which is not good news for Ukraine. That's the change there. Same thing with Solovyove. Dang, I'm gonna get that one of these days. And Otratina, we see they've advanced, basically absorbing all of the village of Otratina or town of Otratina and all of Solovyove. And there was a little bit of an advance over near Novokalinove and Keramik. Not into Keramik itself or into Novokalinove, according to the deep state map. Everywhere else on the map, no significant changes. So basically right now, all of Russia's advances are focused on this little spot right here north of Donetsk. We also talked about Sumy the other day, and it looked like things are getting a little hotter up there. It had been relatively quiet for quite some time, though we were seeing some things going on. And as I recall in previous videos, I said that it looked like Russia was trying to cause something to happen there. Well, they did another attack on Sumy Oblast, which killed 2 elderly women and injured 3. This is on the civilian infrastructure of Belopilya. They do face near daily shelling and raids by Russian saboteurs. We mentioned a large sabotage group that was pushed back just yesterday, in fact, day before yesterday. So it's clear that Russia has intensified their attacks on the area, and I think that this is partially related to the Freedom of Russia Legion and those Russian units that are fighting on behalf of Ukraine against Putin. They saw what kind of havoc they created, and now Russia wants to push some extra room there. We'll see. Here's some video from Otratina. This is showing that the village itself is basically destroyed, and the overall, basically, as always, Russia marches in on the rubble that's left. They would absolutely burn everything down so they could rule over the ashes. You can see the village itself is completely destroyed. The buildings are basically collapsed with only a few still with anything standing. Hold this thought for a second. I want to take a look and make sure I'm thinking of the right spot here. Yes, okay. The Russians, through War Gonzo, are reporting that they have actually taken the village of Novo Kalinove. That's this one right here, which we mentioned didn't look like they'd actually taken, but the Russians are reporting that they have. At this point, I have no reason to believe that's not accurate, but this does indicate that Russians continue to advance at a steady pace in this area. Then there's their full report from the day. On the Zaporizhia front, no major changes. Donetsk front, they talk about the items we just talked about, including Krasnohorivka and Hirivka. There have been some additional changes. They say they've continued to assault those areas, but no major changes. And the Chasiv Yar, the lines of control have not significantly changes, with fighting continued on the eastern route to Chasiv Yar. And Rybar, another Russian source, says that during the troops today, they carried out several attacks on targets all across the front lines, including an industrial enterprise on the northeastern outskirts of the city of Sumy. Now, this is I believe, a missile attack, not an actual assault of any type, but just doing the normal assaults that way. The Rybar also reports that Semenivka has been taken by Russian forces. So a lot of these things are perhaps a little bit advanced from where they are actually at on the front. A little bit, shall we say, generously interpreted on Russia's side. But overall, they match what we know, and we can expect much of these things to either become true or be effectively close enough for us to understand what's going on the front. Let's go ahead and move on to the interesting extras today. Yesterday was International Chernobyl Disaster Remembrance Day. We talked about this quite a bit, including a series of pictures from the Kiev Post that were representative of what was going on at the time. Now, this disaster here claimed thousands of lives. Radiated forests, fields, and the entire city is now an exclusion zone. There was actually a video the other day of the man who was in charge of Chernobyl when the Russians came through during this invasion and started digging trenches and trying to get into the Chernobyl areas. They managed to keep them out of the vital power generation facilities. Understand that that Chernobyl is still doing things even today. I believe it's still even an active nuclear plant as far as the other reactors go. But still, the area is heavily contaminated. The Russians believed there were biolabs around Chernobyl, so they started digging trenches and then digging up different areas looking for biolabs. And he talked a lot about how they managed to irradiate everything and all the negative things they did. And they even took some items that were heavily irradiated out of the area with them. But these are some of the liquidators that were cleaning up the mess over on the roof of Unit 3 of Chernobyl. This is some of this was just handmade stuff that they did this cleanup with. The graveyard of contaminated equipment during firefighting. Again, it was just taking that pram to the liquidated equipment area, measuring the levels of radiation. I mean, this wasn't always a disaster. Interesting to see, and I was interested in particular that story of the Russians who basically disregarded everything that happened at Chernobyl and tried to take over the facility and tried to dig up the areas looking for biolabs in this heavily contaminated area. Over in London, 2 local residents are suspected of working with Russian intelligence. They even set fire to a warehouse owned by a Ukrainian businessman. There's no apparent military or Ukraine-related use for this warehouse. Just the guy was a Ukrainian that owned it, and so they set it on fire. They've now taken a couple of people into custody in connection with these charges, with 5 people in total. Defense Secretary Austin did a few addresses just recently. Let's go ahead and listen to what he had to say in this short section here.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine's struggle for freedom matters to us all. If Ukraine fell under Putin's boot, Europe would fall under Putin's shadow.
Pretty straightforward. Who's going to be helping out Europe right now? If Ukraine falls, Putin will be easily and well placed to cause all kinds of havoc there. This was interesting from Ivana Strodner. If you're following the Balkans, this is really important. Rybar, I mentioned him earlier in one of the reports here, a pro-Kremlin military analysis channel on Telegram, has a media school in the Balkans. Why does this matter? They were last week in Serbia and Republika Srpska conducting lectures on how to create Telegram channels, form networks, and distribute the content. Their key focus was on Srebrenica. Reportedly, they met with students, journalists, politicians, and researchers and trained them to fight information wars and share their experience. They said Rybar's team took on over 10 bright and promising projects under personal support. Why does this matter? I'm putting the link here just in case you want to see it directly from Ivana Strodner. Rybar Channel already announced a conflict in the Balkans. They're already setting informational conditions for it, and now they are training people in the information space. In fact, it's Russia with its proxies in the Balkans that is opening a second front. As Ivana says, she's been following pro-Russian Telegram channels on the Balkans for years, and a few months ago, I said I can't follow Telegram channels as fast as they grow. Warmongering messages combined with Telegram networks linked to the Kremlin have signaled that something was off. So this is the Kremlin effectively trying to foment a war in the Balkans. And they're setting up the conditions for it. Of course, they're going to set up the conditions where they can blame the West, kind of like they did with Ukraine. It's all NATO's fault. It's all NATO's expansion. But again, this is Russia at work. I got to share this one, if only because, I mean, yes, it's a Russian soldier destroying a Ukrainian drone. But if you watch carefully, you'll see that he did it with his duffel bag. So let's keep watching here for a moment. Here's that Russian soldier. He grabs his duffel bag and smacks the drone, causing it to explode. He was injured, we're sure, but he managed to run away. Creative use of his resources. 100%. Whatever was in the duffel bag is no more, but the soldier lives to continue on. Interesting. This is talking about from, I think, a few days ago, the village, this village in the Kharkiv area. It was occupied by Russian forces for 6 months in 2022. They have left behind so many explosive objects that they're still being found. They're even being carried out in sacks, all the mines that they've been finding in explosive objects. As Anton Herashchenko states, about 25% of Ukrainian territory is mined. So I mentioned the other day, I thought it was fascinating how every time the Russians intercept a drone, that the debris always falls on a vital infrastructure object like a, oil refinery or military hardware, a barracks, a helicopter, etc. Well, the Russian channels are a little bit dissatisfied with the official coverage of these successful attacks on the occupiers' energy facilities. They're asking, what are these fragments that are taking out our refineries one by one? And I'll just read this for you here. Enemy channels with millions of followers are posting videos with the results of attacks on an airfield in Krasnodar Krai. I already mentioned those earlier. The person from the Ministry of Defense responsible for construction is already on vacation at state expense. He's in prison. We are more interested in what is reported to the top about the results of the air defense. Fragments fell down? In our unprofessional opinion, if fragments regularly fall in such a way that oil refineries and airfields catch fire, then perhaps not all issues are brought into proper condition in the organization of air defense work from month to month. There is a lot of work to be done. The enemy used something like 40 drones to attack the facility. But these drones are not military in the full sense of the word. It's not even like Shahed. This is, for the most part, converted civilian plywood stuff, flying at speeds several times less than missiles. And if commercial refineries have already begun to equip their facilities with chain link and hire medical units to organize air defense, then in the bureaucratic monster, everything moves at a snail's pace. And as he says, do you know why? Everyone sits and waits for the command. One of the interesting aspects that has been told to me by military members in the U.S. is that the expectation is that lower down members of the chain will be able to make command decisions for their immediate commands and be able to react and do what needs to be done to get the job done. This is not taught in Russian doctrine. In Russian doctrine, you act when you are told to act. You don't act until you are. Remains of a shot down Russian Ka-55 SM cruise missile. I just thought this was interesting. You don't really get the feel for the size of these things until you see one like this. From Simon Kustenmach, a German geographer and demographer in Melbourne, he shows Russia's desired borders according to Peter Zion, who is a well-known geopolitical analyst. And if you look carefully at these borders, you'll see there's Moldova, here's Ukraine, the Carpathian Mountains are right here, Warsaw, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, all along the Baltic Sea here. This is what Russia would want for their borders from 2016. And you can bet it's changed since then. Now, these next couple of items, before we go into other news, and by other news, I mean things that are not related to the Ukraine war. I'm going to play this for you. I'm going to try and get the sound on here. The language, however, is Ukrainian, not English, so you'll need to read along. Let me get this a little bit bigger here.
Та ні, зайка, не балістика, треба подивитися, може це міг взлетів.
Мама, це не балістика?
Ні, не балістика, ні.
Мацай.
Це міг.
Балістика якісь.
Та ні, зайка, не балістика.
How would you
Треба подивитися.
feel
Може це
if that
міг?
was your child asking, is that ballistic missiles? So sweet and innocent. Here's a little child comforting her cat during another missile attack. You can see on her face that she doesn't believe what she's saying either. This is as much for her as it is for the cat. Richard the dog miraculously survived today's Russian strike on Derhachi, Kharkiv region. An aerial bomb hit very close. The animal didn't want anything to eat or drink. His look will make it clear what he thinks about these non-humans. And I just have to say, it's heart-wrenching. Not just the animals, and not just the children, but just the circumstances that have been caused by such evil in this world. From Russia's perspective, corruption is going to destroy their nation. It already is. They're in a war, a hot war, where thousands upon thousands of lives, both innocent civilians and the innocent fighters, for that matter, are dying. And if you look at it from the right perspective, you'll see it was all started by corruption, trying to hide that corruption, bury it, so that it doesn't come to see the light of day. There's no greater disinfectant for wickedness and evil than the light of day, where cockroaches will scatter. And that's everything about the Ukraine war for today. I'm going to go into a few minutes about some U.S. news real quick. A couple of items. One is tangentially related, but overall, this is where the Ukraine war material ends. So I want to thank everyone who has joined me today and want you to know how much I appreciate you. I'm going to go ahead and continue on, and I'll close out in just a moment or two. But again, if you are done with your Ukraine war fix for today, absolutely head on out. Hit me with that like button if you appreciate my coverage. Let's go ahead and move on to this other news I was talking about, and that's not it. Although, I mean, anytime with Reagan is pretty good stuff. Powerful tornadoes tear across Nebraska and Iowa as the Weather Service warns of catastrophic damage. We can see a lot of videos, and let me just mute this real quick. Have been confirmed on the ground. Showing a violent tornado crossing a highway in Nebraska. You can see it's picking stuff up and moving it around. Lots of debris. The tornado roared through the outskirts of Lincoln, Nebraska, tearing the roof off homes and crossing part of I-80 in the process. Overturned a tractor trailer, caused damage to Elkhorn, a neighborhood on the edge of Omaha, with homes ripped from the foundations and trees stripped of their branches and leaves. The Eppley airfield is closed so they can do a damage assessment. And lots of additional tornadoes were also observed in Texas. Lots of damage overall. Some more video surfaced as well of people, instead of taking cover in their homes, everybody's got to run out and film the tornado coming through. That's you'll see some destruction here in this video in just a moment here. Clearing debris out. I'd have them muted for now. They were talking about the damage in a nearby neighborhood like this here. This is the damage of tornadoes that have torn through the Midwest yesterday. Now, we do expect another outbreak today here with another ominous forecast looking like we're going to come through. There was a lot of destruction yesterday. Here's even more video of that destruction and these tornadoes. I'd say it looks like a war zone, except for from all the pictures I've seen of a real war zone, it's not flattened enough. But that does not make the lives so destroyed any easier. And in that vein, here is the convective outlook for today. You can see here we have a moderate section of risk inside an enhanced. I am actually inside this enhanced area, so that's the reason why I've been monitoring the weather today and watching for things to start sparking off. I don't expect anything to happen until later today, but still, this is the risk area. So if you are inside these areas, which cross most of the central U.S. and across into western U.S., make sure you're keeping an eye on the sky and listening for your weather reports. You never know when something might come through. Evac flights were already taking place from Oklahoma City and Wichita, removing high-value equipment from military bases and areas around there in anticipation of today's severe weather. Obviously, they know that they're expecting something. And that's everything about the weather. This next bit, let me talk about Kristi Noem. Now, Kristi Noem is the governor of South Dakota. At least I think she's still current there. She is considered a top pick for vice president for Donald Trump. However, she recently published her memoirs. And in her memoirs, she published a story about shooting a 14-month-old dog, claiming the dog wouldn't hunt. Then further clarifying that the dog attacked some chickens, and when she tried to stop the dog, she was attacked herself. So she took the dog to a gravel pit, threw it in the pit, and shot it, killed it. I'm not going to show pictures of the dog and things like that. Here's what I posted about it on Twitter. Kristi Noem's story about shooting her dog really tells a story about her character. I could almost forgive shooting a dog that attacked the owner one time, though I'd contend that the dog needs trained and loved instead. But she said the quiet part out loud. She hated the dog. Looking at this purely politically, this story was an unforced error in a sea of bad decisions. You couldn't write a more clear villain arc in Hollywood, even if you tried. In fact, the idea of kicking a dog to show how evil your character is in a Hollywood movie is a trope for the ages. But I've said it many times watching the war in Ukraine. A person shows who they really are by how they treat animals, especially small animals, especially those that are effectively at our mercy. Saving, caring for, and loving an animal shows basic compassion, a fundamental humanity. I did watch a video of Russian soldiers torturing a mouse once. They tied it to a post. It acted like they were interrogating a Ukrainian civilian and demanding it to talk. The mouse was literally tied with its legs behind it and scared as all get out as it was tortured by these Russian soldiers. These individuals thought it was hilariously funny, and so they published it for the world to see. But it was a cruel act that showed how depraved they were. Why, in heaven's name, why were they proud of their cruelty? What possessed them to believe that this would show them as anything but petty tyrants? petty tyrants with a gun to cover their wickedness. But I've seen hundreds of pictures and videos of Ukrainian soldiers and first responders saving dogs, cats, and other animals from certain death. And I'll be honest, I've seen some Russians doing the same, very few, but some. Those individuals still had compassion in them despite the horrors of war. And as I said, be better people. There's appropriate times to kill an animal, and there's appropriate times to share the story. Kristi Noem's memoir was neither, showing a stunning lack of judgment and a stunning lack of compassion. And my conclusion out of this is, what happened to the era of leaders that we could actually genuinely look up to? Men and women of strong moral character, ones who didn't lie or cheat or steal, ones who served in the military, for instance, or did a great public service that helped out the poor and the weak and the innocent and defended those who needed defended. What happened to those leaders? What happened to the ones with moral character? Now we're looking at corruption, scandal, shooting her dog for the high crime of being untrained. This dog won't hunt is not an excuse to shoot the dog. I miss being able to look up to our leaders, not worship. No, none of our political leaders should ever be worshipped. But if I can point at one of them and say, there's an example of someone who stands for their principles. There's an example of someone who genuinely loves their country, who genuinely wants good things for people, who genuinely cares, not just for themselves, not just for their wealth, not just for their tax breaks or anything like that, but cares about people, that cares about animals, then I would. Just as something to be an example. Instead, we've got pedophiles, we've got philanderers, we've got cheaters, we have liars. And overall, the end result is people like Kristi Noem, who at one time was a vaunted leader in the Republican Party. There was a time when if you lined up a pedophile, a felon, a cheater on their spouse, and put them all in the same room, they'd all be Democrats. And now it looks like the Republicans have caught up and are trying to surpass them in the area. It's a tough time in U.S. politics, but I still have a positive outlook. I know that the right people are out there. I know that there are people who have looked at the political situation and the people in it and have said to themselves, I just can't do that. And they leave because they cannot believe that they would be able to work with these people. And to a certain extent, it's true. But if they don't run for office or do anything to try and support good people, then nobody else is going to either. But I have that positive outlook that there are people out there that need to be encouraged. And we need to do the right thing and keep on top of our leaders. I do have a representative in Congress that I think at this point in time actually is a leader that could be looked up to. And I've not seen any negative from him. I may not necessarily agree with him on everything, but I believe he is a moral and generally righteous man, at least at this point in time. I pray that he does not turn out to be somebody different. But that's my thoughts for today. A little bit of news, a little bit of weather. I don't think you'll ever see me touching on sports, but I want you to know that there are great things coming. And we just got to be prepared for them to be there. And that's everything for today. Thank you, Lucille. Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Ozzy. I appreciate all of you for being here and for commenting on today's videos. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.